Tom Quee presents The Royle Ramble, an episode-by-episode celebration of the classic British sitcom, The Royle Family. To get in touch with the show, email us at theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. Hey everyone, it's Tom Quee here, back with another episode of The Royle Ramble. I hope you're well, I hope you've had your teas, etc. If you're not familiar with the show, it is just myself here, and I've been going through The Royle Family, which is one of my all-time favourite TV shows. I'm sure if you're listening you agree. It is a masterpiece of character and writing and mood and style and, go back through the archives. You can hear me waxing lyrical for so long, and also into the future as well, because we're not done yet. We are approaching the end of the third season, the final season per se, before we get into the specials and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a great episode as always. Anthony's going to London, had a real joy writing these notes. So just before we get to the discussion, we have a quick email, but just before we get to that, I want to do some housekeeping. So of course you can get in touch with me at theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. That's theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. If you just want to correspond, you want to tell me about how you got into the show, any thoughts on my thoughts, anything like that. Maybe you want to come on for a quiz episode as well. And I do want to give a huge shout out to Alistair, who came on for a quiz episode. So that'll be out probably in 2 weeks by the time you listen to this new. And that'll be on the Patreon as well. So we are on the Patreon. So if you enjoy the show, you want to give back to the show, you want to keep the lights on for the show, this lecky ain't free, then you can support us there. And basically how that works is, I will put the episode on a few days before it joins on the main feed there. So you get a little bit of premium access. What else do we have? We have the YouTube channel where I'm posting things. iTunes, please leave us a review. Spotify, tell a friend as well. Share us in one of the Facebook groups. There's some incredible Royle Family Facebook groups, but just post us in any of the old Facebook groups out there. That would be great as well. So yeah, just before we begin the ramble, we've got an email from Ollie. And Ollie says, "Hi Tom, I just wanted to say thanks for an excellent podcast on one of my favourite comedies. Living in Japan, I look forward to a slice of home every month. Having seen the show so many times, I picture each scene as you describe them while listening on the way to work, and then watch the corresponding episode that evening. My introduction to the show was a funny one. Age 23, I first moved to Japan in July 1998, just months before the show started. I hadn't heard of it until the spring of 2000 when a mate gave me a video that his mum recorded and sent to him, telling me to watch it as I'd love it, and he wasn't wrong. I immediately fell in love with Jim's acerbic wit and the family feel of the show, with Twiggy being my favourite. The only problem was that when I got around halfway through episode 5, the video came to an end. I couldn't believe it. This was days before YouTube or BBC iPlayer, so I had to wait until Christmas 2000 when I next visited home to watch the end of the series and finally see Dave and Denise's wedding. In the meantime, I watched the first 5.5 episodes time and time again, with Sunday lunch being, and remaining, my favourite. The perfect depiction of a nan coming round and the family getting together. Upon returning to England in 2002, I got hold of all the episodes and bought all the merchandise. I even got to meet Ricky Tomlinson at a book signing. My stepbrother-in-law worked at Ottakers and got me 15 minutes with Ricky, who was a proper legend. As a teacher, I used to use loads of the catchphrases with my students. Well, the clean ones anyway. Cheers for the pod, it's a much appreciated home comfort. I'm off for some Dairy on toast. All the best, Ollie." Well, Ollie, so great to hear from you. I mean, especially all the way from Japan. That's, insane to imagine. And so you only got through 5.5 episodes. So to my calculations, that would have been Another Woman. And I guess they would have got back together in that episode, Dave and Denise, but maybe you didn't see Jim's banjo playing. I'm trying to think where the cutoff is. But yeah, it's so intriguing to hear those old school ways. So many people talk about the video and getting into it. And, I guess I was a kind of DVD, more UK TV Gold kid kind of coming up. And then when I got back into the show when I was in my late teens, iPlayer was already around. These things were on demand, and I guess I was spoiled in that way. And, we love the Royle Family for the throwbacks, and there's one, Ottakers. Oh my God, do you guys remember Ottakers? Like, there's been quite a few book franchises that have gone down under in my time of, I'm quite a reader or whatever, like I'm sure many of you are. But, we still got our Waterstones and stuff. But remember Borders and Ottakers? And, it's funny actually that we read this email at the start of the show, because obviously this episode we're about to get into, they watch Shopping City for out of that inane show Shopping City, and that just reminded me of the glory days, the pomp, the late 90s shopping centre domination, your Blue Waters, and even before the Bull Ring, which was just coming along. So yeah, thanks again, Ollie, for getting in touch. And if you guys want to send me an email, that's theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Okay, enough of that. This is Anthony's Going to London, which is episode 5 of the third series, written by Carolyn Ahern and Craig Cash, and directed by Carolyn Ahern. It originally transmitted on the 13th of November 2000 and got 8.95 million viewers. Let's get into it. And in we open on seemingly Barb's favourite thing to talk about, other than the progress of Little Lee with Twiggy, Baby David's bum. We've had quite a few references already, and here we open blatantly onto the bottom itself. Baby David is lying on his front and the shot begins onto the crack entirely, with Barbara saying it's like a peach and how she could eat it, she really could. Clearly being a grandmother, or just a mother in general, is in her blood, and she's relishing the quality time that she gets to spend with her grandson's glutinous Maximus. The camera then swings up from this arse to Barb leaning in for a little kiss, Baby David gurgling slightly as all this occurs. Behind Barbara we can see the parents, who really should be doing this work. Well, Denise at least. I mean, Dave has done his fair share. But they're watching the telly, of course, the box blooming, as Barb puts in a shift at the south end. She coos further and picks up the child, coddling and swaddling him, telling him that he has a lovely bot-bot, and the baby then seems to talk back to her and she responds. I mean, maybe this was improvised on the spot. And as she rises too, we can see Ant sitting in the corner on his typical chair, stooped over somewhat. And Barbara may still believe that she's kept her schoolgirl figure, but she doesn't have as high an opinion of her own arse.
You've got a lovely butt, you have. Yes, you have. Not like Nana. Nana's is going south. Nana's is neither use nor ornament.
Neither use nor ornament is a great phrase, and as Barb walks around the sofa, we can see more of Baby David's things mixed amongst the royal familiana of the bureau. Barb then turns to the family and declares that they're off for their little nap. Barbara says bye to Grandad Jim, and he is cut to seemingly perusing Baby David's floppy baby book, using it as a mouth prop to say ta-ra with a goofy voice. Denise doesn't seem to make such an effort, barely looking at him as she's called, and Dave keeps his eyes purely on the box as he monotonously declares farewell to his sprog. Barbara wasn't actually taking him off for a little nap though, it was Anthony after all. With Barbara saying her goodbyes before passing her grandson off to someone whose bum she no doubt kissed many times all those years ago, Anthony. Barbara who's wearing a nice floral paisley fro, and Anthony who's in more relaxed gear. Pop a nappy on him, love, Barbara says too. I mean, she couldn't have just done that herself. Anthony also seems to carry Baby David a little weird here, almost off from him rather than in a close embrace. But I think that's just this moment, because we've seen that Ant is very good with the kid. Jim is then shown going deeper into the baby book he just used as a mouth organ, singing a little to himself as he flips through, clearly the book being all about Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Barbara then sits down beside the young parents as Jim laughs to himself before casting the book aside. And Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, well, that's a popular English lullaby, the lyrics being from an early 19th century English poem written by Jane Taylor called The Star. The poem, which is in couplet form, was first published in 1806, and it's sung to the tune of the French melody A voudre les maman, I think that's how you say it, which was published in 1761. The English lyrics have 5 stanzas, although the first is the only widely known one. So Barb sits down, a cig is immediately offered, and her and her daughter begin to spark up. And on the telly is a show where a presenter is working behind a deli, saying that his whiter than whites match his character, and asking the worker that he's interviewing that she has to tell him about all the cheeses on offer. He then asks her to ponder what cheeses she thinks that he may like. Off screen we can hear that she thinks he likes mature, strong cheeses, and apparently she's dead right. They spend a lot of time on this show early on, it gets a lot of screen time as it were. He then talks about the presenter this is, about his father liking the mouldy cheeses. And apparently the worker there, her father did as well, but he doesn't. Dave also shakes his head in agreement here, presumably not liking complex cheeses, what with his whole gammon and pineapple whims. The show, by the way, is Shopping City, and it's an interesting relic of this time. And I like the fact that the TV has taken many shades in the royal family so far. We've had them engaging explicitly with it, be it Millionaire or be it Antiques Roadshow. We've had it just as ambient background. There have been soaps on as well. But here they're just showing the sheer inanity that was early evening entertainment offerings at this time. And even though I don't really remember this show, maybe I just remember watching the royal family from this time and thinking that I was watching this show or something like that. But this was the sort of tosh that was back on back then, where, it just kind of was on. You just had to watch it. There was no red button, no Netflix to save you. It's a palate thing, just getting back to the cheeses apparently. You can have different things as you get older. She likes mature ones as she's maturing too, to which Jim raises his eyebrows in response, listening. So the show plays on for a second or two more before Barb asks for an update on the farmyard from Dave. It's nearly finished apparently. He wants to give it to Baby David next week on the morning of the christening, which is obviously the next episode. Denise turning to Barb to smile as he says this. Jim then gets a little punch into Barb, but it goes down well, asking if Dave wants any bullshit for it. He's sure that Barb's got a lot to spare. We're then back to the cheese selling on screen, as we hear that they have cranberries in this one, strawberries too. Wensleydale no doubt being explored here. I mean, what a boring show this seems to be. They demonstrated this perfectly with the clips. Denise then relays a memory from the front line.
The other day, right, I just took my eyes off baby David just for a second, right, while Richard and Judy was on. And the next thing, he only tipped a full ashtray all over himself.
Aren't they lovely at that age?
Jesus. Well, first of all, the dialogue here is superb. The little touches. The fact that Denise says right 3 times in as many seconds. But what do we make of the anecdote? I mean, if the social heard this, baby David would be snatched away right away, and I mean, fair enough. And I'm sure everyone can understand you take your eyes off for a second from a baby and something happens, but for him to tip a whole load of carcinogenic ash over himself is one thing, something Jim clearly disapproves of with his dismissive look. But for Barb to have her blinders up, to respond that this is cute rather than low-key really dangerous, is maddening but unsurprising.
Dave took a picture of it.
Oh, is Dave there?
No, but I waited till he came home from work, you know.
She'll melt her, Barbara.
Oh.
And Dave took a picture, we hear. Barbara wonders if he was there, what with Richard and Judy being on, meaning it was mid-morning. But no, he was at work as normal, so they had to wait for him to come back. So let me get this straight. Denise left the newborn covered in the stubbed out dirt and grime of cancer sticks for like 7 hours. I mean, that's actually abuse. Like, I'm laughing because it's played for laughs. It's a comedy, of course. But, man, it's kind of menacing, you know. And that's the deliciousness of the Royle family, isn't it? That it manoeuvres between these two worlds so perfectly. Dave, of course, though, sees no issue. It's a belter, Barbara, he says, as she chuckles. Again, the show is so brilliant at doing this. Leaning into absurdity and troubling topics, but with just the right amount of wit within the writing of the ignorance to make it funny rather than bleak. So Barbara watches the TV further. The presenter on there is asking a customer how much she would like. It's a treat for a cat, apparently. Ant then comes down, gets into his seat. Across from him, Jim is stationary, watching the box. There's a full ashtray on the table. I mean, watch out, baby David. There's magazines as well, with a cordless phone atop. We can hear a little splish splashing as Ant sits down, but it's unclear at first what's happening. But as soon as he asks Denise for a bit of a borrow, we can see that he's skinning and cutting potatoes for chips. Now, this is something I've always found weirdly antiquated in this show. I mean, we know they have an oven, so why do they do it this way? I mean, is it to save money? Were oven chips not as widespread? I mean, maybe I'm missing something here, but it's like, I don't know, it feels to me like something they do in the 70s or something, but we're coming up to the millennium now, and, you know, I don't know, I was alive at this time, didn't grow up in a particularly well-off household or anything like that, but we had oven chips, you know. But I think you've got to think about it as, one, just an interesting signifier of their class, I suppose, and the kind of place they come from. And also, it's just another nice facet to the scene. You know, rather than just having Anthony sitting there, he's working. I mean, for the family, of course, going the extra mile because the rest of them won't. But it adds a bit of diversity to the admittedly still fresh idea of them all just sitting on their asses. But yeah, it just kind of breaks up the monotony, I suppose. Not that the monotony is a bad thing in this show, anything but. So Denise says no to the borrow, and Anthony knocks his peeler against his potato hearing this. He thinks for a second and then asks Dave if he can have a few quid. Dave, who apologises, saying he's a bit short at the moment. And as this is happening, the Cheese Geezer programme plays on. We hear water dripping, spuds being skinned. Barbara is kind with her reply, says, no, sorry, when he asks. But Jim is an instant no. Barbara looks back at him somewhat, but what did she expect there? Ant then continues his work, looks across to Jim, and just keeps going. Barbara then asks about the bests. It was Dave's mum's 60th birthday due, and apparently it went down a storm. Something that makes it sound like a right, pardon the pun, royal knees up, but obviously it wasn't, as we're about to learn. Everyone hid behind the curtain and jumped out when she walked in. Barbara cheers at this, says it's lovely. It was mainly family we hear as well, Dave and Denise, and the dad, so just the immediate family then. The organisation was left down to Denise, who proudly smiles at this. I mean, you know, I'm sure Jim and Barb would have popped down if she had the thought to invite them. Jim then asks about when the festivities finished. 10 p.m. And the food? Well, Denise did the buffet too. And she's looking proud at this as well. I mean, there's quite a few instances of this in this episode, and the series as a whole, but especially this episode, of Denise thinking something is good when in effect it's tragic. You know, the organisation, for example, that we just mentioned. Baby David and the ashtray and other stuff upcoming. So Jim laughs warmly at this, talks of the old crisp and nuts as being a classic, but then Dave deflates any suggestion that she put any effort at all by confirming that it was just crisps.
What food was there, Dave?
Well, Denise did the buffet.
Oh, the old crisps and nuts, eh?
Yeah.
Well, just crisps.
So what, she put some out on the table? I mean, I bet she just plonked down a multi-pack bag and left it unopened, and maybe didn't even take it out the shopping bag that Dave no doubt picked up on his way back from work. Well, at least Dave's mum enjoyed it. Well, she did, but apparently she got upset because her husband went to bed at 9 o'clock. And keep all these details in mind, by the way, because we do meet Dave Sr. and Jocelyn. We do meet Dave's parents in a later special, and they do not match at all with anything we've heard about them, and I think that's to the detriment, really. But still, going to be fun to get onto those specials, and Dave's dad especially, played by the excellent Tom Courtenay. He's nothing like what you'd imagine. You know, he isn't really the Dave that's painted in these worlds. But still, it's a good performance, and, you know, he's a great actor. And what an interesting comparison it is here. Dave's parents and the Royals, you know. I bet the christening, which we're going to see next episode, I bet that didn't end at 10. You know, no sorry. And I wonder why they weren't invited either. I mean, you'd think the grandparents would go to the christening as well. Maybe they're up there, but they didn't want to go back for the do. I don't know. Interesting. Jim then asks if Dave Sr. is suing anyone lately, and it turns out it's the council, again. Something Jim approves of with a right fist pump. And, you know, they've met a few times now, I imagine, the Royals and the Bests. Jim references Dave's dad a fair bit in the first series in reference to him not putting anything towards the wedding, limp along Leslie and such. And, you know, you picture them chatting at the wedding, the hospital after the birth, that sort of stuff. But I'm not sure if they would have been over to Chez Royale yet. I mean, maybe, probably, but obviously impossible to determine at this point. Barbara is more interested in the party, though, not the council suing, asking if they had music, and, I mean, Christ, it sounds so drab there. It was just a telly on, as the mom didn't want any fuss. Dave telling Barb this, as behind we can hear the TV continuing on, along with Ant's incessant hard work. And Dave seems quite the photographer in this episode as well, not only taking snaps of his carcinogen-covered tot, but also his mam's 60th.
No, but I'll get the photos developed this week, Barbara. I'll bring them round.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, Dave.
Took 4 rolls.
Bloody hell, Dave. Hello Magazine would be interested in them, you know. They do all the bloody big functions.
4 rolls. They probably didn't take that many at Pauline's baby's christening. I can only imagine the carnage that was captured as well. Denise looks impressed and brimming with pride here as Dave says this, and she nods at her dad, who obviously sarcastically fires off that they should contact Hello Magazine as they cover all the big functions. Back to the TV now, as there we have talk of coach trips being really important at Shopping City, and how they bring a lot of people there for commerce, with the focus shifting now to one of the coach drivers. I mean, what is this dross they're watching? But again, as I said, I like the choice of programme here. Nothing memorable or distinct, just the garbage that nowadays you'd switch on YouTube or iPlayer for, but back then you just had to sort of tolerate it or talk over it. So Jim flicks his nose and the camera turns to the TV. The name of the coach driver is Les, and he's a special man apparently. He's someone who drives to the centre every week and he can find you anything. If you can't take the trip yourself, Les will get you whatever you want. Denise seems intrigued by this, sitting up in her seat. Dave is the same as he always is, chin forward into his chest, eyebrows raised, watching in a dazed glaze. Barbara then looks over to Anthony and mentions what is, after all, the title of the episode, where Anthony is heading off to next week.
Anthony, tell everybody about you going to London next week.
Oh, yeah, me and Darren's going to London next week.
London?
Yeah.
London!
Bloody London?
3 Londons in a row there. All 3 of them, Dave, Jim and Denise, cannot believe this news. And yeah, I mean, it's so interesting the dramatic irony at play here, isn't it? Because it's only bloody London. I mean, I'm sure most of you guys listening, you've been there a bunch. Many of you may even live there, you posh motherfuckers. But, you know, ultimately, these characters live very small lives, with the extent of their experience running to the feathers or maybe the outer reaches of the precinct. You know, we've heard talk of Middleton and Gatley and the like, but never 211 miles down the road, down the M40 to the old capital. You know, this being despite Dave and Denise having an overseas honeymoon abroad, after all. And London, well, London is the capital and largest city of England and the United Kingdom, with a population of just over 9 million. It stands on the River Thames in southeast England at the head of a 50-mile estuary down to the North Sea, and has been a major settlement for 2 millennia. The city of London, its ancient core and financial centre, was founded by the Romans as Londinium and retains boundaries close to the medieval ones. London's diverse cultures encompass over 300 languages. The mid-2018 population of Greater London of about 9 million made it Europe's third most populous city, accounting for 13.4% of the population of the UK and over 16% of the population of England. So it's all because of Exit, of course, the trip to London. They're being proactive and they want to see if they can get some interest in the label. Dave thought they broke up, remember Exit? But apparently they're back together, deciding to reform as Darren thought of a really good riff. So Darren can actually play then. He can write even. I'd love to hear this riff. Old gormless Darren Sinclair Jones is apparently a Paul McCartney in our midst over here. So Barb is smiling when he says this, but Jim, of course, doesn't have it in him to encourage his son, rather saying that it's nice to know he isn't living in a dream world, wasting his time. Denise laughs at this, a back and forth she's no doubt heard many times before in these four walls. Why can't you ever encourage him? Barbara admonishes her husband as it becomes clear why Ant was asking for some borrows earlier. Jim then asks further, seemingly sincere, but you know he's just taking the piss as he always does. He inquires if Ant has any appointments, but he says he's just going to let the tape speak for itself. Why can't we hear this tape? Why can't we see the Royals' wedding tape either? So much lost media in this show, and, the naivety here is wonderful as well on Anthony's part. But that is what you think at that age, really, that it'll be so easy, that it's possible even, Anthony's like Axl Rose here at the start of the Welcome to the Jungle video, a hayseed in the big city with a dream. Now, to be honest, Jim is doing Anthony a favour here in a way by gauging his expectations. Do you know where the labels are, he asks, and Ant doesn't, and Jim tells him to get real here, thinking that he'd just bump into the head of EM Bloody I. And EM Bloody I, well, that's EMI Records, a multinational record label owned by Universal Music Group. The original EMI Records was founded by the music company of the same name in 1972 as its flagship label, and launched in January 1973 as a successor to its Columbia and Parlophone record labels. There's so many legendary bands on EMI, but just a few of my favourite: The Band, Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, and even someone who's been mentioned on the Royal Family itself, old Cilla Black. Come on, son, Jim says, and poor Anthony just looks a little defeated at his dad after this, the big spud almost entirely unpeeled in his hand. He's no stranger to graft, of course, but a bit of forethought in this case wouldn't have been amiss, but perhaps he will now seek it out. Barbara then tries to remember who Ant reminds her of and calls him Dick Whittington. Jim coming with the obvious, yes, but without the Whittington. Slightly too easy there for Jim. And Dick Whittington, well, Dick Whittington and his cat is the English folklore surrounding the real-life Richard Whittington, a wealthy merchant and later Lord Mayor of London. The legend describes his rise from poverty-stricken childhood with the fortune he made for the sale of his cat to a rat-infested country. However, the real Dick Whittington did not come from a poor family of common stock, and there is no compelling evidence supporting the stories about the cat or even whether he owned one. And since the pre-Victorian era, the story has been a favourite subject of British pantomime, especially during the Christmas season. So Ant doesn't fire back at Jim here when Jim's going at him. Rather, he goes at Denise, stating that she hasn't even been to London. Neither has Jim either, but we'll get to that in a moment. With Denise here, she doesn't really respond herself, but she rather uses Dave as a buttress, asking Barbara to tell Anthony that Dave has indeed been to London, something he nods at with satisfaction. Barbara's absolutely gobsmacked at this revelation, taking a breath and sitting up in her chair slightly, looking at him amazed.
Yeah, no, I've never, but Dave has. Mum, you tell him.
Dave, have you been to London?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, not exactly London, but we stopped at Scratchwood Services on a removals job,
That long delivery there. Have you been to London? But of course, he hasn't really been there, has he? He stopped at Scratchwood Services on a removals job. Is that really the same as London to Denise? Denise, who again, like the crisps and nuts, like Dave taking loads of photos prior, seems proper proud of absolutely nothing of note. All I got to say to Anthony is get out of there. Set off to London and never look back. And we will see in Queen of Sheba that he does kind of do that, and he does kind of outgrow this place. But here perhaps we have the early inklings of his aspirations elsewhere beyond this small house, watching bloody shopping city. And Scratchwood Services, well, it's now known as London Gateway Services, but it opened in 1969 as Scratchwood Services, and its main approaches are those built for an abortive junction free of the M4 and a link to the A1. On the 6th of September 1997, many people parked at the service station to witness the passing of the funeral hearse of Diana, Princess of Wales, on its way along with the M1 from central London to a burial place in Althorpe, Northamptonshire. So Dave delivers his info about him going to London but not London with a nod, and Denise even pats his knee as if he's regaled the clan of some great achievement or something. You know, I love the unintentional dramatic irony you see within TV shows. And here there is few richer, as Jim then starts digging into London, claiming that at the times, this would have been, 2099? It's shock horror, £3 a pint over there. Something that is very cheap today, I'm recording this in 2022, very cheap outside of London standards, and nigh impossible to find within the city itself. Indeed, on the very day I'm writing these notes, I found a Guardian article that states the following. Quote, the price of a pint in London has long been bemoaned as a sign of how expensive it is to live in the capital. However, as crowds flocked to central London to toast the Queen on the Jubilee bank holiday weekend, some would have been staggered if they ordered a round of drinks in one pub, after it emerged that the average price of a pint has topped £8 for the first time. And not only is that expensive to Jim, the £3 a pint, but it's as flat as a witch's tit too, witches not typically being the model of fertile femininity. And Barbara is fighting back here, fighting Jim back hard in this episode, stating that how would he even know about this? He's never been, with the patriarch then foreign back himself, with admittedly a good un.
A pint of beer, £3 a bloody pint, and it's as flat as a witch's tit.
Well, how would you know, Jim? You've never been to London.
I've never been to Dave's mother's bloody house, but I know it's bloody boring there.
Take the notice, Dave.
I love Jim's raspy laugh there and hilarious deflection. Denise laughs and Barbara tells Dave to take no notice, he who kind of smiles and just watches the telly as it goes on. So Jim has had his fun, been admonished, but now he's back at it again, getting his voice nice and low as he creates a hopeful picture for Anthony, only to cruelly puncture it. He sits up, looks at him and talks of him playing it right and what could be possible here, the industry all being desperate to produce his next album, The Lark. And Anthony here seems hypnotised by Jim, completely on board with this fancy that he's building and eager to hear what's next.
And then they're bidding against each other and throwing all sorts of cash at you and promising you all sorts of untold wealth, eh?
Yeah.
And then they're both desperate to produce your next album?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what happens next, don't you?
What?
The bloody alarm clock goes off and you wake up in your own little bed, in your own poxy little bedroom, you soft sod.
Jim.
It's bad because you can see Anthony deflate in real time as he realises what Jim is getting at. Him being in his own poxy little bedroom. A bedroom that he and Barbara provide, I should add. Ant just looks back at his father here, future chips in his hand, resigned. And Jim explodes in proper laughter, the type of joyous laughter we've heard many times before, and that's undeniably infectious. But consider what he's booming at here, directly at his son in his dreams. You know, he's expended tons of energy, Jim, here, concocting a fancy, only for it all to be cruelly at Anthony's expense. It's savage, really. Not kind. His head's full of bloody magic, Jim decries as Ant continues to peel. Barbara says it isn't kind, and Jim continues to titter. And that phrase, his head's full of magic, it always sticks to me, stands out. I mean, what's wrong with that, Jim? What's your head full of? The next time you can get down the feathers without Barbara finding out. Denise tries to change the subject slightly, but not in a good way for Anthony. She asks if Emma's going to London. He swiftly says no, still smarting from Jim, and Denise asks why not, with a real parpy chirp to her voice.
Hey, Anthony, is Emma going with you to London?
No.
Why not?
Well, you know, it's a business trip, innit?
The reason that Emma isn't attending is it's a business trip, something which Barb takes on face value and says that she'll have to make some sandwiches, which is hilarious, so motherly. But Jim is naturally there with spite, saying they'll have to share them out with the executives. I mean, Jim could retreat here, sensing his son's upset, but, of course, that isn't him. It isn't his daughter either, who starts to needle at Anthony now, teasing him like a teenage sister would, rather than a married mother of one. She says she thinks Emma's going off him, with no real evidence, just to piss him off. Barbara shakes her head sweetly when Denise asks for backup from elsewhere, but Jim and Dave concur. He never used to hang out with Darren before, but now he can't move without him, Denise says. Which is kind of true. I mean, we've seen a lot more of Darren in the show recently, but still a little nasty to get on his back, particularly when Ant can be sensitive about these things and, has stormed off in the past. Dave sees it differently, though. Thinks it's Emma going off him, to which Anthony bites back saying, she's not all right, rousing lots of oohs from the family. She's finally come to her senses and woke up out the old coma, Jim says. And I know he's being playful here, but with what he's just said, it's understandable that Ant fires in retort that they're getting on fine, thanks, throwing more spud skin into the bowl below for emphasis. Jim is then about to say more on the matter when he turns his attention to soft lad Ant and the fact that he's peeling the spuds too thin and wasting the potato. Christ, he really just has to get at his lad from all angles, doesn't he? His career, his love life, his potato work. It's sad, really. And Barbara is cut to here, sadly within herself, eyeing Jim to the side, clearly feeling for Ant hard here, not wanting her son to be so put upon by the rest of the clan. The TV continues and we hear of a treasure hunt and fashion show along with a knife working into the tuba. Now, despite being shellacked by most of the family, Anthony then changes his mood, turns entertainer and, picking up some potatoes, begins to juggle them with ease. It's impressive, no doubt, and, I for sure can't do something like that. And Dave seems absolutely entranced. It's as if a 16th century peasant has just been shown an iPad. Denise, too, is happy to watch, and Ant gets a good rhythm going, concentrated but still able to smile to himself when Barbara says that he's always been gifted with his hands. Dave calls him Budley, as is his wont at this point, and Ant ends with a flourish, catching them all together and raising his hands as most of the room applauds. Jim, of course, has his hands folded across his belly and shakes his head, which is something I really hate here. Like, how hypocritical. How many times has he got his banjo out and showed how gifted he is with his hands? He says his son's head is full of magic, but clearly he has some skill, so why not be kind and at least respond warmly, but of course not. In his eyes, it's no doubt prolonging dinner as less potatoes are being chopped. This reminds Denise then that her own hubby has some serious digit dexterity, and he then demonstrates the trick he can do with his finger. I mean, you know the one, you flick the end of your finger to make it tremble like jelly. It is distinctly not impressive, really. I mean, maybe in the primary school playground, but Barbara is as bewitched at this as what Dave is doing, as Ant displaying his own adroitness. She titters and awes, asks how long he's been able to do it, and he reasons last March or April, as if the time has stuck in his mind because it's so historic. Here Jim is cut to shaking his head and, I can actually get on board now with this reaction. Dave then checks exactly about the origin with Denise.
How long have you been able to do that, Dave?
I think it was about last March or April. Something like that. About last March or April, wasn't it, Denise?
I think it was about, last March or April, something like that.
The repetition again showing the slowing of their minds. Barbara digs even further, asking not only when he found out he could do it, but how he came upon it. Apparently it was when he was in a magazineless doctor's surgery and he was just going like that with his finger, and then suddenly it just went to that. And I'm a bit bemused altogether why Barbara is so pleased with it, but she is genuinely interested in anyone, so it makes sense why it should get her attention. There's a nice shot here then with Anthony in the foreground, purely focused on his potatoes, with zero interest in Dave, as his brother-in-law flicks in the background. Denise watching as if she's never seen it before. He's always been great at doing anything like that, as Dave, Denise says. And what does that mean? Oh, he can do this thumb trick where it looks like it comes off his hand. Wonders never cease. Dave also, like Anthony, has a little flourish at the end, fanning out his fingers as if holstering an instrument. Denise even kisses his hand and looks at him proudly. I mean, it's a nice moment between them, of course, but it's still all a bit bemusing for the most part. Jim says he should book out the Palladium for Dave, and that it's no wonder that Bruce Forsyth keeps bloody working. Brucey, who was mentioned in Barbara's Had Enough, admits when they do all those impressions, just before Dave ruins it all by doing some Larry Grayson. And the London Palladium, well, that's a Grand 2 West End theatre located on Argyle Street in London, in the famous area of Soho. The theatre holds 2,286 seats, and of the roster of stars who have played there, many have had televised performances. Between 1955 and 1969, Sunday night at the London Palladium was held at the venue, which was produced for the ITV network. The show included a performance by the Beatles on the 13th of October 1963, and one national paper's headlines in the following days coined the term Beatlemania to describe the increasingly hysterical interest in the band. And while the theatre has a resident show, it is also able to host one-off performances, such as concerts, TV specials and Christmas pantomimes. It hosted the Raw Variety performance 43 times, most recently in 2019. And in March 2020, the venue was closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic's effect on the theatre industry, but it reopened over 4 months later on the 1st of August 2020. So Jim then checks that the coast is clear and attempts to do Dave's thing with his own finger. I mean, I'm sure we've all tried it too after seeing it. And I'm sure Jim wouldn't have been able to do the juggling, but maybe he can do this silly diversion at least. So Barbara looks at him, Jim, now. He pulls it a little bit more and tries. She turns to him and then he coughs to cover it, sheathing his hands back together. Barbara asks if Denise is stopping for a tea, and she asks if that's all right. I mean, as if it ever wouldn't be.
It's only egg and chips, though. Them sausages we had are out of date now.
The shock on Jim's face there to hear that food has run out of date in this house of theirs. Sausages, no less. Dave then asks how out of date they are. Barb doesn't hear him at first, so he asks again how out of date they are. It's about a week or so, we learn, which is a fair chunk. It's not a day or two or now, but that's all right by Dave, he says. He doesn't bother about any of that stuff. Ain't that a lovely way to live, Barbara says to top off this exchange, which just kills me every time. I mean, what's a lovely way to live? Pure ignorance? Willful disregard for food hygiene and no thought of oneself's well-being? So I was thinking about this, and I found a little thread through the classic old-school website, thestudentroom.co.uk. I'm sure many of you who were undergrads went on that at the time. I certainly did. And this was someone asking about sausages, but they were only asking about 1 day or 2 day, not a whole week like Dave. And the poster replied to them, "You'll be fine, as long as they're not pork sausages. Poorly stored or out-of-date pork can contain hydroxylates, which are basically particles found in some meat that find their way into your bloodstream and thin your blood. Depending on the amount of these ingested, you can suffer anything from a lightheaded feeling to the loss of use in the extremities of your body due to a breakdown in circulation." So Ant glances at Dave here, but doesn't say anything. Jim then asks Barb how they let this happen, how they let the sausages get out of date. Have they won the bloody lottery? So, what is the inference here, ultimately? Is it that Barb is going to cook these sausages alongside everyone else and just give them to Dave? I mean, surely Jim will want in the action then, maybe checking that Dave doesn't keel over first before digging in himself. Silence then descends for a few moments. Everyone watches the telly. The scene breathes, but it's soon shattered as Ant's phone blares out its polyphonic purr. He picks it up out of his pocket. It's Darren, as if to prove Denise's point earlier. He says easy now in Ali G speak and then confirms 8:30-9ish. Says West Side again and then says goodbye. I mean, Sacha Baron Cohen's creation, clearly still a big part of their communication. Jim asks who it was, obviously knowing it was Darren, and he then imagines them in London. Calls them a couple of old rent boys. And Dave then uses the gifts in his hands to demonstrate something else entirely, seeming to mimic an arsehole being licked. Denise then, of all people, Denise oddly fights her brother's corner, claims it's just not fair, and even Ant looks at her shocked here.
Don't say that. You're always horrible to her, Anthony. It's just not fair.
So are you?
Well, he's my brother. I'd hate anything bad to happen to him in London.
Oh, Denise. Oh, that's lovely. What a lovely thing to say, Denise.
It's a real sweet moment. And perhaps nicest is to see Barb happy that her daughter cares so much for her brother. Really at this point in her life, Denise should be past the petty squabbles and teasing and just support Anthony in whatever he does. But, hey, here's some character growth still on her part. And even Dave seems shocked there initially. So London looms large for Lurkio then, and clearly Denise is wary of the big bad city swallowing her bro whole, sandwiches and all. Ant too seems warmed by this whole exchange, doesn't smile outwardly but still gives her a knowing look. They can have these moments, these two, like on the morning of the wedding, for example, when Ant says how nice she looks and she says the same back, playfully hitting him with her bag. And then the shocker of shockers, Jim opens up too.
You take care of yourself, Anthony. You look after yourself in London, son. You're not a bad lad, really. Hey, and if there's any trouble, you just call home, all right? And I'll have me and Dave to answer to. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, we'll look after you, Ant. Don't you worry, lad.
Barb the whole time being open-mouthed at this, which is kind of sad, really. Should a mother really be surprised that her husband, her son's father, is kind to him and wishes him well? And then Dave chips in too at the end, agreeing with Jim that they'll be there to deal with any trouble. I mean, admittedly, even if something did kick off, they take hours to get down there, and, it'd probably be best to involve Darren's Uncle Jack in proceedings, maybe, but still, the sentiment is lovely, especially after the barrage of bollocking that Ant's just received. And Ant really beams here, smiles to himself, to the sofa, to the TV, to Barbara, who smiles back. Barbara, who just prior, when she'd heard all this, looked on the edge of joyous tears. It's excellent acting all around. Jim's smile at the end warmly too, and he glances at Barb, who coos again, and she seems really pleased by the whole thing. And why shouldn't she? Ant gets another few looks in, few smiles. Barbara breathes out deeply with satisfaction, and, all is well for a time. All is at one. Then Norma arrives. Yeah, Norma's in the episode too. I mean, you wouldn't know it, as there's been no mention of it in the episode itself, or no clues that she might be around, like in Nana's Coming to Stay, or Nana Comes to Stay, or whatever. But no, with 2/3 of the episode down, Norma comes down herself, huffing, classic grand blouse on, bundles of magazines under her arm. I think by this point, the writers had clearly realised that Liz Smith should essentially be in every episode, or in as much as possible. So, yeah, let's get Nana involved.
Oh,
Not Halloween, is it?
So she totters in, clearly aggrieved in some way. Jim asks if it's not Halloween, is it? Which gets Dave a laugh. I mean, what does he mean here? Her visage, her face, I suppose? Barbara makes room on the sofa, scoots up, and Norma then drops down. Her hair seems cut, and it looks quite nice in that kind of way that grands get their hair cut. You know, they're going to have that fresh look that still looks a little dated. And the jewellery's as standard, you know, maybe some new pieces from Elsie's collection. It's hard to compare. So Barb asks if anything's doing. We have heard of Norma's issues down there before with the Cenopods and the Dynarod mention in the Sunday afternoon episode, and here she regales us further. Apparently she used to be regular as clockwork, and she was upstairs now for nearly 40 minutes. It's funny to think of her up there straining as we spent all our time downstairs with these lot here. And of course her struggle will come up again to close the episode, as it were. So Norma then asks after baby David. Denise at first doesn't seem to know where he was, but then realises upstairs and that he's fine there. Denise then tells Norma about Anthony, telling her, you know, our Anthony. You know, not as if she wouldn't, but, you know, it's just in the way Denise speaks. She says yeah, and Denise lets her know that he's going down London next week. Ant confirms it, and Nana then reaches into a handbag, Anthony keenly looking across, Jim pursing his lips in anticipation. Norma then starts to unpack a bag, and this feels like a scene out of a cartoon or something, but in the best possible way. You know the ones I'm talking about, like something from a Fleischer or Roger Rabbit, you know, as a tiny thing stores so much. Like a TARDIS, I suppose. You know, they say you should never ask what's in a woman's handbag, but Norma here allows us to peer inside, unceremoniously dumping its contents one by one onto Barb's lap. And lots of these, I feel, are nice subtle callbacks to the past. We see an orange, a remote, which has been mentioned before when she stopped over last time, a habit for taking these, a flashlight for some reason, a club biscuit that was no doubt given out here and stored, pliers, which Barbara holds up smiling, a light of some kind too, and then finally, her purse. Jim twists his hands expectantly, and Nana then fetches in deep for £3, which is passed over and then over again to Anne, who checks it and then puts it back into his pocket, clinking along with his mobile. Jim sticks up 3 fingers, annoyed at the small amount, but he's unlikely to put towards any more, is he? And Nana then takes up all her flotsam and jetsam and pops it back into her purse with a satisfying crunch of the clasp. On the TV, we hear someone saying, very meticulous, as she siphons it all away. Barbara smiles at her and they laugh at each other. Denise also turns to them and smiles. And even after last week, though, we still haven't heard the last of Elsie, as Norma tells the family that her daughter, you know, Marion, she went to London to see something. And there's some classic old-school comedy writing here, as Barbara thinks it was Cats, but Norma says no, it was a musical. I mean, classic, right? And Cats, well, Cats is a sung-through musical composed by Andrew Lloyd Webber, who actually owns the Palladium as well, based on the 1939 poetry collection Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot. It tells the story of a tribe of cats called the Jellicles, and the night they make the Jellicle choice by deciding which cat will ascend to the Haverside layer and come back to a new life. As of 2022, Cats remains the 4th longest running Broadway show and the 7th longest running West End show. Long-running foreign productions include a 15-year run at the Operahaus in Hamburg that played over 6,100 performances, as well as an ongoing run in a purpose-built theatre in Japan that has played over 10,000 performances since it opened in 1983. So Jim grimaces at this, at the money, at her recollecting, all that sort of stuff, you know. And they stopped at a hotel, Norma continues, but she doesn't know where it was or what it was. She is aware, however, that every night they put a mint chocolate on their pillow. She's confused about this, Norma. She asks Barbara what she thinks, and then Norma starts to repeat herself to Denise, as we know her to do, what with Michael Crawford and the twinkle in the eye and that incident. Denise just goes with it. I mean, she's within earshot. I mean, hell, they're sitting on the same sofa and just watching the same telly, but Norma gets into it again. And we can see Denise wince here slightly and look at Jim, who is reciting it with ire. Denise, however, says she doesn't know what to think. Norma doesn't either. She's unsure why they do it, and Barb says she isn't sure either, as, I mean, she's not been to London, as if it's a London thing rather than a posh hotel thing. I mean, it happens in Manchester too, I'm sure, and Denise doesn't know either when asked. And this got me thinking, you know we like to do our research over here at the Royle Ramble, why do they do that? Well, apparently it's down to Cary Grant. Actor Cary Grant was staying at the luxurious Mayfair Hotel in downtown St. Louis. He was a frequent guest and booked the penthouse suite, and he had a woman who was meeting him there. At the time, Grant was married to his 3rd wife, actress Betsy Drake. As the story goes, the woman arrived at the suite before Grant did, and found that he had laid a trail of chocolates. It started in the living room, ran to the bedroom, across the bed, and onto the pillow, a sort of seductive Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb trail. So the Mayfair's manager heard about the chocolate gambit, likely because a staffer had to procure the chocolates and lay them out, and he liked the idea so much that he made a chocolate on the pillow upon arrival one of the hotel's many standard amenities. Since then, hundreds of hotels have adopted the gesture, although the Mayfair discontinued the act a few years back. But when the hotel was sold and became the Magnolia Hotel St. Louis last August, management restored the tradition with chocolates from St. Louis's chocolatier, Bissinger's. And apparently every room now gets a chocolate on the pillow, particularly the 18th floor's Cary Grant suite. Norma then digs into Cheryl slightly, saying she'd like that, the thing on the pillow, supposedly with her being a keen eater and all. I mean, she shared Norma's chips last episode, and Norma had commented to her in the past that the bridesmaid's dress looked dead tight on her, but it was the style, we must remember. So Norma is like Jim, as we've always said, and Jim then jumps onto Norma's joke, saying Cheryl would like a whole chocky pillow. Everyone laughs, Jim snorts even, and Ant laughs hard as he continues to cut the spuds. We then cut back on the TV to Les, the coach driver who claims he can find anything at Shopping City. I mean, God, what an antiquated age this is, and it wasn't even that long ago. Back when you had to physically look for things, rather than have them algorithmically recommended to you. He's looking for 6 items, we learn, for someone in North Wales, and God, the shopping centres looked glorious back then, still in their 90s pomp. He passes a giant Debenhams at one end and it still has that old ribbon logo of yore. I have a lot of good memories of being a kid and going to these places, getting like PS1 games and stuff like that. Oh, life was so much simpler. So we get a good clip's worth here of the show, of Shopping City. Dave and Denise seem interested, and, he's got near enough with a plate that's been requested. We see him comparing some porcelain, but not quite. Barbara is watching along again. She's quite intrigued, no doubt wishing him well. Even Ant seems interested here, formlessly gaping at the box in front of him. So Les tries Selfridges, but struggles, and Jim Tut's here, clears his throat, gazing. We then see Les go into a giant HMV, and they don't even really have these anymore. How sad is it, by the way, that the flagship on Oxford Street is now an American candy store, which is no doubt a front for laundering. It's maddening. But as someone torrented a lot in his youth, I guess I am kind of responsible for that as well. Les is looking for a Johnny Preston record, and I believe it's called Running Bear, and this is a teenage tragedy song written by Giles Perry Richardson, aka the Big Bopper, and sung most famously by Johnny Preston in 1959. The song tells the story of Running Bear, a young Indian brave, and Little White Dove, an Indian maid. The two are in love, but separated by many factors. So Norma is then shown to be nodding off slightly as she's watching, and Les comes out of the HMV claiming he's not on a very good day at the moment. I mean, he's hardly a crack detective, is he? He's looking for a CD that someone wants in HMV. Bloody hell. So we hear the spuds sloshing in the bucket, and Les says it's on order, the CD. It takes about 10 days. I mean, what a bunch of tosh this show is. I love it. Les then tries to find some glass from Home Spoils, and he gets a no. He seems disheartened here. What a waste. Denise laughs at this. 4 hours later, it's cut to, and still no success, the narrator tells us. Dave chuckling too, Ant shaking his head dismissively. Barbara then tells Norma that it's just egg and chips, and she says lovely, confirming then that Denise and Dave are stopping. Barbie's maybe getting a little lazy here? I don't know, she no doubt deserves it, but with a lack of prep in the last episode, fish and chips, no washing up, and now she's saying we'll just have it on their laps to dinner, save laying the table, but none of the clan disagree. The TV then continues, and Les is in front of Jessop's, stating he's picked up 3 of 6 things, so it's not too bad. Norma then mentions her doctor, Dr. Goddard. Apparently he's been great with her, but Jim is of course only interested in the jokey side, asking what his opinion of euthanasia is, laughing instantly at his own gag. Not waiting for any family reaction, but just wheezing it out in that muttly way of his.
I'm going to see Dr. Goddard tomorrow, Barbara. He's been smashing with me, has Dr. Goddard.
What's his views on euthanasia, Norma?
Oh, he's lovely. He's married to a midwife.
And euthanasia, from the Greek good death, is the practice of intentionally ending life to relieve pain and suffering. As of 2006, euthanasia has become the most active area of research in bioethics. In some countries, divisive public controversy occurs over the moral, ethical and legal issues associated with euthanasia. Passive euthanasia, known as pulling the plug, is legal under some circumstances in many countries. Active euthanasia, however, is legal or de facto legal in only a handful of countries, for example Belgium, Canada and Switzerland, which limit it to specific circumstances and require the approval of counsellors and doctors or other specialists. In some countries, such as Nigeria, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, support for active euthanasia is almost non-existent. So Norma ignores Jim, of course, and continues talking about Dr. Goddard, who he's married to, would you believe it, a nurse. Norma then starts to get a little reflective, saying, wouldn't you want to be near them, you'd feel safer. Jim mimes a tiny violin, and Barbara corrects her mother here that Elsie was in fact housebound, so, it wouldn't really matter in this regard. She did have a first aid tin, though, Norma states. And I love that detail there. A first aid tin. It just feels so intimate, that precision of description. It's fantastic. Poor Norma, though. I mean, she is still alone. She's still grieving at some level over Elsie. And Norma then confesses that she actually owns the tin as well. Jim seems to kind of gnash his teeth at this. And then he gets on Ant again, but admittedly, this is a good one.
Hey, don't go cutting the chips that bloody thin. You're not working for McDonald's. Yet.
Yeah, even Ant has to laugh at that one, and then he gets back to work. Norma then brings the mood down slightly as she says she can feel some movement. Jim says hellfire, though, as he wanted to expel some hellfire of his own. He's been baking it for a while and he can't hold on much longer. He's been really looking forward to this shite. And you believe it. You know, Jim seems to get so much pleasure out of this thing. Jim, always with the witticisms on hand. Interestingly, like Denise does at times, Norma talks through Barb, as does Jim, both delivering their messages on who is going to use the toilet. Jim then crafts a seeming non sequitur, saying he was going to do some furniture while he was up there. A couple of stools. Dave and Ant laugh at this, Ant sticking his finger up and returning to the chips. Nana then starts regaling Barbara about a programme she liked with a posh woman who always has a glass of booze and a cigarette in one hand. That's our Denise, Jim fires back. You know, he's full of them tonight. Nana struggles to remember, though, saying it's someone who made a bra out of a pair of slippers, which allows Jim to correct her that it's, of course, Joanna Lumley.
She made a bra out of a pair of slippers.
It's bloody Joanne Lumley, you bloody old clown. Yes, she made a pair of slippers out of a bra when she was on that island. She didn't make a bra out of her bloody slippers. Bloody hell.
Oh, I got it wrong, didn't I, Bob?
Great to hear Norma hoot there at the end, and it's Jim in a way that kind of uncorks her here at the close. And now, despite the prominence of effluence, there isn't much actual fart sound effects on the show, so this is kind of an interesting anomaly here. I mean, there's a few of them, but this is one for the ages.
Slippers on.
So Norma just looks stoutly at Jim quickly, and then goes up for another try mutely. Everyone already unable to hold it in. Jim's giggling hard as Nana slowly moves up before everyone else explodes. All of them in conference. Good old Norma, Jim shouts as it closes. She no doubt able to hear all of them as she makes her way upstairs. And it's great how this episode, and also Elsie's funeral, kind of end the same way. End with just the whole room bursting into laughter. Credits. Like, I love that. I love that close. And just before we do end, Joanna Lumley. Dame Joanna Lamon Lumley is an English actress, presenter, former model, author, TV producer and activist who has won 2 BAFTAs for a role as Patsy Stone in the BBC sitcom Absolutely Fabulous. She supports charities and animal welfare groups such as Compassion in World Farming, and she was made a Dame in the 2022 New Year Honours for services to drama, entertainment and charity. And what a nice, quiet episode in a way. No big plot points or drama or even anything distinct on the television. And sure, it's about Anthony going to London and the opinion of the capital and the wider world in general to the family, but altogether it's a more retiring proposition than, say, next week's offering, The Christening, where loads happens and there's loads of characters. But as ever, as always, due to the genius of the writing, the delicacy to which it's put together, and the joy of these characters, it works a treat. And there you have it, my thoughts on Anthony's going to London. We'll be back next month for the Christening episode, which I'm hyped to get into. Not only because it's the best type of Royal Family episode where you have all the characters together, but you have all of the characters together, and you also have 2 fantastic new ones as well, with PJ and how could you forget Michelle. So I'll be back there, so go subscribe, go back through the archives, check out all the old episodes, get in touch with me, the royleramblepod@gmail.com, keep an ear out for the quiz show dropping very soon with Alistair, YouTube's there as well, subscribe, spread the word, leave us a review on iTunes as well, please. We've had 29 reviews for so long, I'd love to just get to that dirty 30. So again, this has been Tom Quee, the Royle Ramble, much love, I'm off to Darren's, bye.